You're listening to Voices of Customer Experience. I'm your host, Mary Drumond, and on this podcast, we shine the spotlight on individuals who are making a difference in customer experience. We also proudly bring you the very best of customer experience, behavior economics, data analytics, and design. Make sure to subscribe or follow us on social for updates. Voices of Customer Experience is brought to you by Worthix. Discover your worth at worthix.com. Annette Franz is founder and CEO of CX Journey. She was named one of the 100 most influential tech women on Twitter by Business Insider and is regularly recognized by companies around the world as a top influencer in customer experience. Annette co-hosts the weekly CX Chat on Twitter, serves as an executive officer on the board of directors of the Customer Experience Professional Association, is a speaker and an avid writer, and you can find her work not only on her own blog, but on the Business to Community, Customer Think, Quality Digest, APICS magazine, and more. She is also an official member of the Forbes Coaches Council. Welcome to the show, Annette. It's good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
We also have my co-host, James Conrad, joining me today. Hi, James.
Hi, Mary. Good to be here.
Annette, you've got so much experience in customer experience. You've been working with this community for so long, and you've got so much to add. And one thing we were really interested in talking to you about today was employee experience and how important and how front and center this has become. And the fact that all of a sudden everyone is looking at this is probably, for you, it's probably great. How long have you been talking about the importance of employee experience?
Oh my gosh. Since I started in this space, I started, I hate to even say this, 26 years ago. And when I joined J.D. Power and Associates, I remember back then talking to clients about, I know we're listening to your customers, but hey, we've got to listen to your employees too. That's so important. And the constant response that I got was, well, we want to listen to customers first. We'll listen to employees later. And here we are 26 years later. And finally, these companies are starting to listen. So for me, it's really exciting that employee experience has really started to be put more toward the forefront. So.
Yeah. Well, since we're at the topic of when you got started, tell us a little bit about your journey getting to where you are today and your background and your mission for customer experience as you see it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's funny because somebody asked me the other day, there has to have been some catalyst for you to have gotten into this space. And I was like, no, I was reading a newspaper back then in 1992, looking for a job. And I saw an ad for J.D. Power and Associates. And I was like, I love math and I love writing. So let's put the two together. And there's no better way to start that as a project director at J.D. Power and Associates. So, but you know what? I was there for 5 years. I spent a little bit of time in the market research world, but then really most of my career in this space has been voice of the customer. I'm working with the voice of the customer platforms for 15, 16 years. Had 2 stints on the practitioner side, one with Mattel many years ago, and then one with Fidelity. But have worked for Touchpoint Dashboard, journey mapping software. I've worked for an AI predictive analytics software, and probably about a year and a half ago. And I've had this, for me, it was like, ultimately, I want to go out and do this on my own, work on the projects that I love to do and work on the things that are meaningful to me and the way that I want to do them. And so about a year and a half ago, that opportunity presented itself. And so I went out on my own, started my own consulting firm, and here we are. And, I keep saying it's the best decision ever because it's been a lot of fun so far. It's been a great ride.
Wonderful. Awesome.
We did want to talk and focus in on employee experience today. You've written a lot about this. You have a lot of opinions and have given your listeners and people who read your content a lot to think about. But just sort of ahead of that, there's something that caught me on your website. You have so much great content. Everybody should go to the website and have a look. We'll give everyone the website at the end of the podcast. But you wrote the 10 Commandments of Customer Experience. So that's pretty bold, but it's really interesting. Could you talk a little bit about that? What was the inspiration for that, and maybe highlight some of the key things in there? I thought it was really
Oh, for sure. And years before that, I had written the 7 deadly sins. And so I was like, well, I hope that
I hope the Bible term.
Come at it from 2 angles.
I am a recovering Catholic, so there you go. That's about the extent of it. So, but honestly, there's there's so many foundational or fundamental elements that have to be in place for a successful transformation, that to me, it was like, you know what, people aren't doing this. They're committing sins. It's a bad thing, because you're not going to be able to transform the organization. You're not going to be able to transform the experience. And so it was kind of like, here's the stamp, here's the, this is what has to be done. And, and it's evolved. I wrote the 10 Commandments a year and a half ago, whatever it was. And I've since then, in my conversations and whatnot, have added to that, so there are more than 10, but I think the basics are around making sure that you've got executive commitment. You're not going to get very far in your transformation efforts if you don't have executive commitment. You're not going to get very far either if you're not listening and understanding your customers. And I typically frame that up in 3 different ways, right? So understanding for me is defined as listening, surveys or other things that are not surveys, right? Other listening posts. Yeah. And then characterizing, which is personas, and really understand and empathy maps, and really understanding who your customers are, what their pain points are, jobs they're trying to do, and all of that. And then empathize, which is journey mapping. So if you're not doing that, then if you don't really understand who your customers are and what their experience is like today, you're never going to be able to understand what's going well, what's not, and what needs to be improved. So that's a huge, and then I think one of the other sins or commandments was around, you have to do something with what you hear, right? And with all that. And I find so many companies who just sort of stop short, they stop short of that. And it's like, well, what's the point? What are you trying to do? And then obviously, and because we are talking about employee experience today, putting employees first or more first is one of those commandments as well. It's so true. Employee happiness equals customer happiness, and you've got to be looking out for your employees. You've got to have created a great culture. That's the foundation for really everything that happens in the organization and beyond. And so you've got to have developed that great culture, and then really focus then on the employee experience and making sure that they're heard, they're valued, they're developed, they're appreciated, they're really understand how the work that they do matters, the impact that they have on the customer experience and beyond.
Last week, I believe, or a couple episodes ago, I was speaking to Nate Brown from CX Accelerator, and he's got a great page on there called CX Primer, and he mentioned that you had contributed a lot to helping him produce the message that was on there. And one thing that he says is that there are 3 steps to doing customer experience right. And number 1 is employee experience, followed by voice of customer, and then lastly, what he calls experience engineering, which I imagine would be designing the personas, customer journey mapping, and actually taking the time to sit down and design how the experience of the customer is going to be, what's it going to be like with the company, right? And one thing that I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of companies that when they're like, oh, we've got to improve our customer experience, so they start at experience engineering. And they want to begin the process by designing the experiences of their customers, but they're ignoring steps 1 and 2. Do you feel like that happens with the companies that you work with?
I do. And, there have been companies that I've worked with in the past where I've worked on journey mapping projects with them and initiatives and the whole process, right? And we get into the workshops, and the first thing they say is, we want to map the future state. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, you can't get to the future state until you understand the current state. Again, if you don't know what's going well and what's not, how are you going to design? And if you don't understand, if you don't take the time to listen to your employees and to listen to your customers and to do that understanding piece of it, you're really going to struggle to design. And what's going to end up happening is it's going to be inside out thinking, right? You're going to end up designing based on what you think you know or what you think is best, and that's just the wrong way to go about it.
If you want to understand more about the science behind customer decisions, follow our blog at blog.worthix.com or find Worthix on your favorite social media. Getting your CX project off the ground? Start with the right foot by downloading our CX guides, ebooks, and playbooks on worthix.com today.
You talked as well, Annette, about customer experience culture pyramid, and
Yep.
I wasn't able to attend the webinar in the time frame that we had, but could you talk a little bit about that? I was intrigued and I wanted to know more. I'm sure our listeners would be interested.
Absolutely. The typical organization culture looks like this, right? If you think about the pyramid, it has 4 tiers, right? Maybe mission, vision, and values, maybe. And then it's all about revenue and profits. And then the next tier is customer, and the last tier of the pyramid is employees, right? And that's all wrong. It's really, the foundation is mission, vision, values, and purpose, right? That is absolutely the foundation. You've got to have that done. You've got to start there. And not every organization has that, but I'm seeing, a lot of them do, but not everyone of them does. And they don't live that either, right? So even if they have that, you've got to live those values. You've got to, share the purpose and make sure that everybody you hire is in alignment with that, all of that. So that's the foundation, really. And then the next thing you've got to have, and people might disagree with this, but you've got to have executive alignment, right? Your leadership team has to be working well together. They've got to be living the values as well. They've got to be modeling the behaviors and communicating and all of that. Then the next thing in that pyramid is the employee experience. So here we go. We've got this foundation. We've got the leadership in place who's going to ensure that our employees have a great experience by, like things I mentioned earlier, listening to them, developing them, making sure they're heard and valued and appreciated and all of that. Then the next level of the pyramid is customer experience. So we're going up the pyramid. So next level is customer experience, because happy employees drive happy customers. And if we focus on, so those two pieces, employee experience and customer experience, now we're saying put the people first. And when we put the people first, now the top of the pyramid is your revenue and profits, right? So if we focus on the people, the numbers will come. But it's, a lot of companies go straight to the old, management philosophy that we're in business to maximize shareholder value. But in reality, if we focus on the people, that will happen. We're not saying that that's not the case anymore, that you shouldn't focus on maximizing shareholder value, but you've got to focus on all these other things to get there.
Well, I always thought that these things, that the end was profit and revenue, but the means are the levers that we can pull, right? And it's kind of like if we do all the things before, get the right alignment and get the right focus on our employees and customers, then we will achieve great profit and revenue.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. Absolutely.
You spoke of executive leadership. Do you find that it's hard to find executives that are on board with customer experience programs? I mean, not the idea of customer experience, because sure, everybody agrees with that, but the nitty-gritty steps.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. No, you're spot on. It's hard to find somebody who doesn't agree with, we've got to have a great customer experience. But when it comes right down to it and put your money where your mouth is, it's a whole different story, right? It's still a challenge for all of us out there. So
have you come up with a secret sauce? I mean, this might sound silly, but it's like, how to convince your boss to get on board the CX program in 3 steps.
Wow, wouldn't that be nice if it was 3 steps?
Have you come up with a formula or at least guidelines that people can use? Because there's no way we can improve, ultimately customer experience, but firstly, employee experience if you don't have the decision makers on board.
Exactly. And the way that I like to say it is that once you have executive commitment, you will get the resources. And those resources are financial, human capital, time, whatever it is, you will get that. But the executives have to be on board. So yes, I typically like to say that in order to get that commitment, you've got to do 2 things. You have to appeal to the left side of the brain, and you have to appeal to the right side of the brain of those executives, right? So you've got to appeal to the head and the heart, basically, and left is the numbers and analytical, right is the creative and emotional and whatnot. So the creative emotional side is telling customer stories, right? And this is where I like to bring in journey mapping as well. I had a journey mapping session years ago where the CEO sat in on the session, and not the whole thing, but what he saw was eye-opening enough for him that he committed the resources to the team to get the work started, because he was like, wow, this is what we put our customers through. So telling the stories of your customers, whether that's through journey mapping, or it's, the verbatims that you get in your feedback, or it's, doing immersion programs, or, however it is that you're going to tell the story of the customer and the customer pain, right? And then the other side is really the number side, right? This is, every CEO, every executive likes to see, and everybody grumbles and moans when we say this, but ROI, right? So we've got to prove the business value, what's in it for the business. And so we've just got to get, I like to say, just to have like start a like Skunk Works project and start to listen to customers and do something with that. And if you can start to show the impact from those little projects, then you can go and build your business case from there and show your executives, hey, listen, this is what we did. And I worked with an insurance company years ago as well, where we did that. And they had quite the story to tell about the customers that they saved, the at-risk customers that they saved, to be able to get the resources that they needed from their executive team. So it works. It really does. But you have to appeal to both sides of their brain. So.
Okay, so let's say we do that. It works. Executive team is on board.
Yep.
Now it's time to get down to business. Where do we start?
Yes. So typically when I'm working with clients, I have like this 5-phased approach. And that first phase is really about getting the executive commitment. Then it's about, we look at making sure that the values, the mission, and values are in place. Typically like to get feedback from employees and customers at this point, just to kind of get a baseline. So it might be doing interviews, or it might be looking at existing survey data or feedback, or whether it's social channel or whatever it is. What do you already know about your customers and your experience and what the issues are? And at this point too, we'll set up a governance structure to provide oversight and assign the teams and the champions and everyone in the organization who's going to be involved in this transformation. And then from there, we go into the heavy lifting, right? This is the next phase, is all about understanding. It's all about, as I mentioned earlier, listening, characterizing, and empathizing. So it's surveys and listening posts, it's personas, it's journey mapping. And that's both, and these can happen simultaneously, employees and customers. So anything that I mentioned in this process is going to pertain to both the employee experience and to the customer experience. And then from there, once we've done that, we go and we take a look at what we've got now, right? What have we heard, and how do we implement that? And we start to build sort of the blueprints for where we're headed. And then once we've built those blueprints and we start to implement the changes, and I'm talking at a very high level here because we could talk for an hour just about this process, but once we've implemented those changes, then there's communication and training and onboarding and, incorporating all of this into orientation and onboarding and all these different programs internally, and then communications to customers externally to let them know how their feedback's been used and the new experience and all of that. So, and then it's really a continuous improvement process. You're going right back to the beginning and making sure that nothing has changed, right? But it's all of that is really like a 2 to 4 year process until it becomes your new normal, right? It's no longer, hey, we're working on this transformation. It's now our new normal way of doing business.
And then, Annette, for one of the challenges that we've seen in talking to clients sometimes is, you have a group at the center that's absolutely on board, but you sort of stretch that all the way down to the part-time employee in the store or the hotel or the airline. And how do you get that person to feel empowered, to take action, to be on board? Do you have any suggestions or some cases that you've seen, or companies that have done a really good job at empowering those frontline employees and getting them sort of in sync and aligned with where the organization is trying to go?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things that I would say. And the first one is know your audience, right? So different things motivate different people, right? I think the biggest part of that is communication, right? It's huge. And keeping them up to date, everybody, whether it's, the people who are full-time or part-time or out in the field, or, whoever the folks are, communication is huge. Regular updates, quick wins, sharing successes, all of that. So people can start to see that, oh, this is working. This is real, right? It's not just the flavor of the month or anything like that. So, and I would say, again, know your audience too, in terms of how they are best motivated, or how they're most inspired and those kinds of things. So, and the other piece of that I would say is hook on to those core values, right? And once you've defined those core values, you're going to use that to hire, fire, promote, et cetera, right? And so there are going to be times when somebody is just not a fit for the culture and they don't get it. They don't want to get it. And, then it's time to have a hard conversation, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, once you've got your core values set and you're living and breathing them, you will likely not hire people who won't be a part of the team, right? And get on
it starts at the hiring process, right? It starts at that right fit. Now,
absolutely.
Maybe investing a little bit more time in hiring the right people.
Yep.
And ultimately that'll transform into good employee experience and good customer culture, right?
Exactly.
Worthix is disrupting the market research industry with cutting-edge technology and a revolutionary methodology. Visit Worthix.com to learn how we're using artificial intelligence to improve customer experience at companies like Verizon, Jeep, Blizzard, HP, and L'Oreal.
Annette, do you also see, we talk a lot about voice of the customer.
Yeah.
Do you also see a critical part of this is voice of the employee as well, and having a mechanism in place where employees can feedback about their engagement and their experience? And
absolutely. You've got to be listening to your employees. Now, here's a caveat, right, is you've actually got to be doing something with it. And that's the problem that I've seen more often than not, right, is that companies are listening or will listen, but then they don't do anything with it. Or they survey them too much, every quarter or twice a year, or, and pulses here and there. And again, either don't do anything with it, or it's just like, I'm giving my feedback so often that you haven't even changed anything. I'm just going to repeat what I put in last quarter's survey, So it is a critical piece of this. Absolutely.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder about these surveys. Is it really about some executive having a number on a scorecard to show, and then people feeling like they're being heard? But the reality is, if you don't take action, it's almost this facade. We're listening to you, but the reality is, if actions don't come from that, then
exactly
it could be more detrimental.
And that works both ways. It works for voice of customer as well, right? It's exactly the same dynamic. If you think
exactly. Yeah. So when I talk to people about this, I usually say, I probably will say customer because we're talking customer experience, but everything I say applies to the employee, and it applies first. So,
Well, back, continuing on the subject of empowering the frontline, if we step into the role of the decision makers and the executive suite for a moment, and, you have great examples of companies that I say are the leaders of the new experience economy,
right,
and companies that are doing a really good job, so Amazon, of course, is one of them. You've got Zappos. You hear great stories. You hear great stories about Southwest. My personal favorite is Chewy.com. And the frontline employees that are actually dealing with the customers, they've got so much power to right on the spot make or break the experience. And the reason they have this is because the company gives that to them. From an executive standpoint, how much power should we give these frontline employees to that degree, right? Because I can put myself in that seat and say, okay, well, if I empower this guy to make decisions about, money or something that's can actually be harmful to the company or whatever, because that person is representing and speaking for the company at that point. How much is too much? What's the right amount of power to give these employees? And how can you make it so that by feeling like they have the power to make decisions, they become better evangelists of the brand?
Right. So I'm going to just go back real quick to the core values, because the beauty of the core values is when everybody knows what those core values are, they help the employees understand what's right and what's wrong, right? What behaviors are acceptable and what's not. And when everything's framed around those core values and the guiding principles along with those core values, then it's easier to, especially when we hire and fire and promote based on the core values too, then it's easier to open up and empower them and give them a little bit more freedom to do these things, right? So the companies that you named, and I'll add, like Ritz-Carlton, and you gave a good list there of companies who have clearly defined core values. They are hiring and firing based on those. And they have given their employees the freedom to do what you're talking about. So Southwest, I mean, they have so much, the employees, I fly Southwest every other week, right? And I love reading their magazine and the stories that people write in about what employees have done for them to save their trip or to save, find something. They dug through the trash to find something, nobody, there's nobody standing over the employee saying, go do that. They took it upon themselves to do that. So again, it's rooted in their core values. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. The other thing is two examples. I'll give you two examples. And I don't remember which company this was. It was $1 million mistake that an employee made. And I don't know if this is a myth out there or
an urban legend.
An urban legend, that's right, yes. And the executive was over that employee was like, well, that was $1 million lesson is what it was, rather than a firing employee. So, there you go. I mean, to have an executive like that is awesome, right? On the flip side, there are several hotel chains that allow their employees, and Ritz-Carlton's one of them, $2,000 a day. You go and do what's right for your customer, for the guest.
Yeah, that's a great example right there.
Yeah. And it's not that they're going to do that every day and they're not going to spend $2,000, but to know that they have the ability to do that, and they will just go that extra mile for the guests because they have the freedom and the ability to do that. So, and again, going back and rooting it in the core values and making sure they know what behaviors are right and wrong.
Yeah, I love talking about Chewy because I'm a Chewy customer. Awesome. And I mean, they probably don't even know I exist, but I love them so much. And there is somebody that works there in Florida that knows exactly who I am. And this person sends me postcards and she reaches out. And the other day I had a silly problem on the app where I couldn't create an automatic renewal, like an automatic shipment. And I just wrote them a note saying, hey, I'm having a problem with automatic shipment. I've tried quite a few times. It's getting frustrating. And they wrote me back 5 minutes later saying, I'm so sorry you had the trouble. Let me make it worth your while. I'm giving you 10% off. And here's a step-by-step. If you have any more problems, here's my number. Call me and we'll go through this together. That is not something that I get from other companies.
Right.
This is something that Chewy alone gives me. So I don't care if I can find dog food 15 or 20% less at other stores. I am not getting that kind of treatment from anyone other than Chewy, and that's what makes me stay with them, right? But this is because of an employee, and the employee can only do that because probably the founders and the heart and soul of Chewy have this mentality.
Exactly.
Right. Now, how do we pass that on to, I mean, that example of the $2,000 that they can spend, that was a great example. That was exactly what I was looking for, of like, how can you pass this on? How can you tell employees exactly how much liberty they do have? Like, okay, you can do this, but you can't do that. Like, are there well-defined rules that you see happen?
I'll go back to the core values, right? That's exactly what that is rooted in. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when they go through and Ritz-Carlton has, I forget what they're called, but there's this whole like gold standard that you can go to their website and you can see all of it. And it is the Ritz-Carlton way. And that's what, when you are brought on board as an employee there, you are indoctrinated into all of that, so it's a pretty amazing thing that they do. And they obviously they treat their employees well and they treat their customers well.
Right. So it boils down to training.
Yeah. Going back to employee experience, it starts at the beginning. It starts when you go through orientation and onboarding, and how you're brought into the organization is huge. That's, day one, day two. And if that's messed up,
right.
It really does set the tone and the foundation for what the experience is going to be like and how empowered the employee is. And again, what the employee knows is right and what's wrong.
And do you see also, Annette, a relationship? It feels also like there's some trust here between the company and the employee to have good judgment, right? And to sort of deliver against these mission and values. Have you seen in the work that you've done that you find if employees sort of have that sort of relationship and feel empowered, that they can not only can deliver a better experience for the customer, but also that they feel more engaged with the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. The bottom line is that I think, at least I feel this way. We're all adults, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to go to work and, well, this is true. I don't want to go to work and somebody's constantly looking over my shoulder and telling me what to do and how to do it and all that. I'm like, you hired me for a reason, and I bring value to the organization, and give me some guidelines and set me free and let me go and do what I need to do, and allow the employees to take ownership of and accountability, right? So I think that's the bottom line.
Awesome. Annette, if anyone who's listening wants to continue to hear more from you or even get in touch with you to work with your consulting services, how can they do that?
I have a website, cx-journey.com, and all my contact information is there. I'm, also very active on Twitter at Annette Franz, and I'm happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn as well. My mantra or my mission, going back to question that was asked earlier, my mission is really, I know, right? we knew we were going to get around to it at some point, is really to, A, spread the word, and B, help people. I love helping people, and I love coaching and teaching and really spreading the word. As you guys have mentioned, my blog is, it's prolific, right? So I love doing that. So always happy to connect and always happy to help folks.
Well, I can vouch for that because I've heard many people give firsthand accounts of how you just step in and help, and you expect nothing in return. And that's really amazing. And I think that the community is very grateful for everything that you're putting in.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, thanks so much, Annette. It was really a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, you're welcome. It was great talking to you guys as well. Thank you.
Bye.
All righty. Bye-bye. You too. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Voices of Customer Experience. If you'd like to hear more or get a full podcast summary, visit the episode details page or go to blog.worthix.com/podcasts. This episode of Voices of Customer Experience was hosted and produced by Mary Drumond, co-hosted by James Conrad, and edited by Nick Gomez. Blog copy and summary by Emma Waldron.